FedEx, it is a trending ticker on Yahoo Finance today. You're looking at shares up just over 1.5%. The delivery giant announcing a massive restructure, planning to combine its ground and express delivery networks. Here to break all of this down is Anthony DeRuiter. He's Third Bridge senior analyst. Anthony, it's great to see you again here. So certainly from the stock's reaction, up just around 1.5%. So I guess you can say investors are a bit excited about it. What do you think?
Thanks so much for having me again, guys. For sure, the stock's up a little bit less than where it was pre-market, by the way. But, for an event that was designed to, I guess, settle uncertainties about their execution strategy with Drive, with Network 2.0, the event actually raised a lot of questions, at least for us over at Third Bridge, namely, how realistic are these about $6 billion, $4 billion in Drive, $2 billion in Network 2.0, $6 billion in cost savings, these opportunities, how realistic are they? How realistic is network integration for FedEx, given their history of segmentation? What sort of risks do they open themselves up to with network integration? And what does it mean for them competitively in the near term? So, if we're going to nitpick how realistic these cost savings are, like if we take the 700 million that they're targeting over in Express for their air fleet, last time I was talking to you guys, we talked about how minimum flying hours, pilot pushback, those would be very real risks for the company in executing there. Well, the pilots are picketing outside the event. That's what I saw last time regarding what happened today over at the Drive event. The overall direction of them wanting to densify, sort of optimize, cut, and be more efficient here and there, definitely a step in the right direction, but the language points to capacity cutting. So 30% reduction in trans-Pacific frequencies. That's a high yield route. You might be giving up some yield there, is what our experts are telling us, if you give up capacity on the trans-Pacific. They want to use third-party lift. They've tried it before. There's major cultural differences in moving from sort of hub and spoke to point and using third party. So you're essentially telling them, look, stop what you've been doing since the start and now completely overhaul everything. So there's a cultural wall there, if you will. And if you're going to take capacity out, well, we talked about that last time. How are you going to convince the pilots who are pushing back? How are you going to take capacity out of the fleet without putting, air slots and landing rights at risk? And then just things like, for example, if it's not about cost, if it's about improving the yield and the margin profile, they say they want to target SMB. Bree was really, she was quite confident that they would gain share in SMB, but that is a segment where they're typically and historically less competitive than UPS, because UPS can play around with their more efficient cost structure and better service thus far. Plus, overall, last thing I'd say there is just FedEx was very contradictory with their language. Like, they talked about Sunday deliveries and how that's a key comparative advantage for them there. But at the same time, they announced that they wanted to pull that back before.
So, Anthony, fair to say that you're a little bit skeptical about a number of the announcements that did come out from FedEx today. Let's talk, because there was a lot to break down in what you just said. You brought up the cultural challenges. You brought up questions just in terms of how much FedEx is going to actually be able to cut costs by. What about just the timeline of this? When you talk about the scale of this transition, do you have any sense in how long something like this is going to take?
Yeah, so I mean, the timeline that they've talked about, sort of all this realized by somewhere in fiscal 2027. The sort of, let's call it near to medium term timeframe, the sort of 2 to 3 year timeframe there. You're talking about a complete overhaul of the network, and if they're going to do this quote unquote right, our experts are saying, again, no ground, no express, just one network. That means subjecting themselves to potentially different labor relations, regulations, and we can talk about that later. But it's a very quick time frame, and when we talk about how realistic integration is, when that question was posed today at the event, Raj had Sriram answer, and Sriram said basically, look, you've got 450 initiatives as part of Drive, each of them with their own milestones, their own paths, their own financial values, their own investment requirements. And Raj actually has his sort of finger on the pulse of how everyone's doing and whether certain pods are struggling with delivering on initiatives. That's how they sold it to investors over at this event. Now, if you have 450 different initiatives and they're all sort of competing for the same internal resources, that seems to us more like siloization as opposed to de-siloization, which is what network integration would be. So 3 years might be a stretch, but that obviously is crystal balling.
Well, Anthony, let me ask you this, because when you take FedEx, a lot of people obviously compare it to UPS, the other massive giant out there. How does this transition, what the restructuring is going to look like at FedEx, how does that compare to what's currently in place at UPS?
All right, so actually that is a big question. And the best way to talk about this is to first talk about what network integration means vis-a-vis how FedEx will look relative to UPS. So what actually happened during the event is you had an analyst bring up, if you integrate your networks and become one entity, how do you stop your company then coming under or guaranteeing that it continues to come under the Railway Labor Act? Because UPS is under the NLRA regulations, and that has, well, it's given them the ability to sort of have this one network that gives all these density and efficiency benefits that they have over FedEx historically. But at the same time, they now have a Teamster contract renegotiation this year, which is posing quite a bit of a risk. So if FedEx does successfully and truly integrate their network into one, put Ground Express together, you're one entity, and you look more like UPS, yeah, you might have those benefits from a sort of a density and operational standpoint, but now you expose yourself to some of the risks that we see with UPS, which is union risk, strike risk, less flexibility over your labor.
Yeah, getting back to some of those labor questions there. Anthony DeRuiter, always great to get your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.